Hi everyone, welcome to day 46. Good evening to you. As for today's t-shirt, because I am in fact doing brighter today, I'm wearing my VOX Tech shirt. VOX Tech, we may need to change our name. Today was one of those days where multiple completely different projects somehow all circled around almost exactly the same. Again, this keeps happening lately. I'm honestly starting to pay attention as if I wasn't before. This morning started with Boulevard, and it ended up becoming a really revealing session about the relationship between the low end of my voice and the upper notes. Typically, mornings where my bass range was really present usually meant the upper part of the voice was going to become unstable. It cracks, it misses notes, it just dries out, that kind of stuff. Just in general, difficult to access. And this morning, something different happened. The low notes were extremely available this morning. My speaking average range was sitting unusually deeper than usual. It was about a G1. That was the hello, that kind of thing. I warmed up, because usually warming up will open up the top area. And after warming up, my G1 voice was still there. I had a supported chest F sharp 1. I could hit F1, but it wasn't really anything to write home about. Normally, that would have made me expect the chorus to fight me, because the chorus of Boulevard is the F4. Instead, the upper notes just sort of stuck. Sort of like throwing a Velcro dart at a Velcro target. It honestly became one of the biggest realizations of the morning. I'm increasingly starting to suspect that healthier coordination may not actually separate bass mode and upper mode, at least the way I've kind of been subconsciously treating them. Instead, the voice may actually function at its best when everything is allowed just to organize more continuously. Here's that again. Instead of behaving like some disconnected system. Of course, as I talk about not forcing and letting it happen organically, Boulevard increasingly is doing the same. Just a few weeks ago, it felt almost always like I was trying to desperately assemble coordination piece by piece and hope it stayed online long enough to survive one of the sections. Now, the problem is becoming much narrower and much more specific. Today, I realized that opening word, lonely. I walk a lonely road, still seems to be manufactured differently than the rest of the phrase, which temporarily disconnects the vocal color before the system settles back again. So I get this, I walk a lonely road. That's a huge over-dramatization, but that's sort of how it's going. In the lower sections, I may actually be under-supporting some of the bass line now, because the notes themselves are becoming naturally available enough that I subconsciously assume it'll just happen. Those notes in the range of there, it's there. You can hear that my voice is a bit higher. I have posted a video of me with morning voice, But despite that, I can get down here without any problem. And I think that it's sort of a mental case of resting on my laurels. I know that that note is going to be there, so I'm not putting in the necessary effort to lock fluidity in. Obviously, this feels like a very different problem than where we started with Boulevard. Another really important moment this morning happened when I went back and listened to a short demo excerpt that I had sent to somebody, helping listen to some of my earlier vocal samples. I sent that out on the 30th of April. I talked about it on one of the episodes, or maybe more than one. The demo came from take 82. I have to check the notes. Like I said, April 30th, and honestly, I expected listening to it to be cringeworthy. I remember listening to myself the first time I set off on this journey. But I listened to it. And what I actually heard was the progress I'm making now. I'm nowhere near perfection. I'm definitely not perfection. But I could hear the difference in continuity, in recovery, stabilizing things, overall coordination between then and now, without just going, oh my God, this is terrible. And honestly, that reaction is probably one of the healthiest realizations of the entire morning. I have been my own worst critic, of course, and very low self-esteem when it comes to the performance of music, especially with sort of the wake-up call I received at the beginning of the journey. But that wasn't my reaction. My reaction was, okay, that's where that was, and I know where I am now. And that sort of led me into a bit of a debate with myself about whether I should send a short thank you message updating the person who listened to my recording back in April. It had been 2.5 weeks, and when I first got their evaluation, I thought to myself that I'm not going to jump on an immediate resend. I'm going to wait about 2 weeks. Well, now we're 2.5 weeks, and what I wanted to do was tell them that the integration work from their advice is progressing. I spent a while carefully trying to make sure the wording, because I wanted the message to stay appreciative for their help and grounded. I was doing everything in my power, because I didn't want it to sound like I was seeking validation or seeking performance advice or anything like that. Now, the process of writing and refining this message, it became a really useful way to determine after the previous 2 takes if I was out of breath or generally fatigued. But by the time I finished working through it, it became clear that actual fatigue had arrived, and stopping was probably the healthier call instead of escalating into another take. One other interesting note was that the absolute terror that I felt, not just sending off my first demo, but my terror of what they were going to say, all of that was allayed. Now, granted, it was easier because I wasn't sending them another demo today. I was just sending a letter that said, things are going along well, and once things are stable, I hope to send another example to you. And they turned around really quickly and said, that is great. So yay on that. Let's see. Weirdly enough, the afternoon brighter session ended up reinforcing almost exactly the same idea again, just from a different, of course, completely different direction. Brighter continues where I'm just working verse A1, or verse 1A. 1A. I have 3 tracks. One is VOX Experiment, VOX Learn, and VOX Perform. And I am staying strictly in Learn because right now it's a question of feeling it out. Today, the piece shifted away from simple familiarization. Fans singing the song over and over and over again, but with no intent to really perform it. I mean, some people will go for karaoke, but the average person just loves singing songs and isn't really looking forward to singing in front of other people. So I moved away from that simple familiarization, and I actually started to move toward an internal, the interpretation and getting it stabilized. I actually started the session very silently, before singing it at all, just trying to reconnect theatrically with the material before jumping into singing it. And that increasingly seems to matter for this piece because the theatrical and emotional understanding is beginning to affect the actual vocal behavior itself. The strongest changes today were less about hitting notes and more about the familiarity reducing internal restriction. The voice was sitting much lower against the karaoke track than in early, not lower, no, it's louder, sorry. The voice was sitting much louder against the karaoke track than in the earlier sessions. And I think that was probably because the support and the energy are beginning to connect more naturally. So I am finding that level of energy instead of being very carefully contained. As those takes went on, I was able to manage the energy better so that the energy was still up, but the volume was not blasting as hard without losing support or color. You know, it's that wonderful dance. And by those later takes, I started noticing something that, well, it feels important, but that I also want to be careful not to overstate too quickly. I'm beginning to touch just the very edge of it feeling like my interpretation, not my imitation. So I've talked a few times about the scar I am now performing is not Jeff Castellucci's scar, it's not Jeremy Irons' scar, it's my scar. And that is a sort of ownership because I've begun to make my own obvious choices where I'm like, I want it to sound like this. It makes more sense to me. And I just began to touch that on like the first 2 lines of verse 1A. Now, does that mean I have achieved ownership? No, not even close. I can feel what it will feel like at some point. It's sort of like touching a gold bar but not being able to leave Fort Knox with it. It increasingly feels like there are moments where I'm starting to understand what I emotionally think the piece is doing instead of only reproducing somebody else's choices. And that will be an interesting jump, because if I'm able to make that jump more cleanly, I may never actually be able to imitate CB. I may just find my own voice earlier in the process and just go off in my own direction. I will say at this point, there are certain things that are imitated that just are not imitated well. I am, however, because of the energy and the support, hitting a much more unified vocal color throughout the entire sections. But I am not fully convinced that means that I found the color that I want it to be. It is very easy with me currently working on just having a primary technique for things to inevitably sort of draw toward each other in sound. And Vox should not sound like Scar. That's the simplest way to put it. So I think part of what I'm hearing may simply be the sound becoming coordinated and internally organized overall, rather than necessarily becoming the final interpretive sound for the character in the piece. It's really quite curious. Yeah. Oh, meanwhile, the expansion session for Read Between turned into one of the most, well, it was successful calibration sessions that I've had yet. So I am using the flex pitch functionality of Logic. And the last time I was sitting with this, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I couldn't figure it out. Eventually I stretched it and I could see boxes. So today I kind of transitioned from I can see it to I can really use it. And that was a great step up. So I have this contour system, which is basically, does the melody go up or down? Or does it sit? And I kind of modified my contour system so that it would be indexed so that I knew an up or a down was associated with a certain note number, counting from the first note in my note frequency. Excuse me. That it would associate itself with one of the notes that I had picked out. I also expanded it to be proportional. I had talked about 1D being basically the length of one note, that we then have half D and 2D, where the 2D can be a sustain or can be two syllables next to each other that are on the same note. As I've expanded that system, the whole analysis started really getting a lot easier. It exposed what appears to be the source of my earlier, I love the word consternation. I love that word. There was a synchronization drift. In other words, as an example, my notes went up, little down, up again. And the way I was reading the flex pitch drawing, it was up, down a lot, and then across. And that made no sense, because it was like, okay, we're locked in for the first part, and then it falls apart. What it seems to have been is you cannot count that each square represents a note or a double square, primarily because flex pitch will pick up random artifacts, basically an extra block in the diagram. And the problem that I recorded last session was that it went up and then dropped too fast and too low compared to the notes that I had sort of figured out by playing it off of a piano. And I realized that there was an extra block today, because when I took the extra block out, everything kind of just sort of rolled together into synchronization. So I'm calling it likely an artifact, because until I'm completely sure of everything I have going on, I don't want to rule something out and then discover I ruled out the one thing that is correct. I'm watching the traders right now. Don't rule out the obvious. So it is a likely artifact. It's not a real musical event, meaning a note or a rest, but everything aligned and it started making sense. So, once again, that same lesson just keeps popping up all over the place. Things stabilize more naturally when I don't force it. I just let it do what it's supposed to do. Everything reconnects eventually. If you just let it go, and now I've got Frozen going through my mind. Trust what you're building, because if you can't trust what you're building, then there was no point in building it in the first place. Yeah. Before I wrap up, I've been getting feedback that a lot of folks really like my my deeper dive into Brighter, and I will definitely be doing more of those as I continue working the piece. So definitely there will assuredly be more spoiler marked entries in the future. But I'm curious whether people would be interested in me doing deeper dives into other has-been songs as well. If it sounds interesting, drop a note in the comments, because I'm really enjoying this process of why is the character using this line. I'm really learning a lot about that. And it was really quite fascinating about a year and a half ago to meet Sam Haft and sort of geek music with him. For those not familiar with Has-Been, he's the half of the music team that has written the music for that series. And it's very interesting seeing the way he views what he and Underberg do to craft these songs. I'll get into that on another I'll get into that on another episode, because I could just start rambling on about Has-Been right now, and I'd rather gather my thoughts so it's a little less disjointed. So I think we're gonna put 46 into a box. Yeah. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Sometimes it's strange. It's often evolving. Sometimes I get hit in the back of the head with a clue by four many, many times. But it's progressing, and that really makes me happy. And I'm glad, if anybody's watching this, that I'm sharing that joy and that experience. So tomorrow is day 47. And until tomorrow, later.